Our text for this morning's sermon is from Exodus chapter 17, the first 7 verses. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do for this people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it so that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" May God bless this reading of the word. One year in September, our family took a camping trip in Colorado, traveling through the higher elevations in the Rockies. At that time, we drove from one state campground to the next. In some areas, already in September, the trees were beginning to change to their fall colors. However, the thing that determined how long we could stay at each campsite was the availability of drinking water. We carried a large container of water which we would refill at each location. But in some campgrounds, we would be greeted by a sign warning campers that there was no drinkable water in that location. And when that happened, we could only stay overnight, and then we had to move on the next morning. We human beings may go days without food, but the human body cannot survive very long without water. Depending upon our age and our physical condition and the temperature and the humidity, a person cannot last more than a few days without water. Our bodies are mostly made up of water, and our systems depend upon it for our life processes to work. Over the past year, we have watched various news reports showing the devastation caused by too much water. Whole communities have been wiped out by hurricanes and tidal surges and floods. But too little water is also life-threatening. A drought may do its work more slowly than a flood, but it can be just as devastating. Our text this morning tells of the people of Israel moving away from slavery towards freedom, from slavery in Egypt to a new life in their own promised land. But before they could get to the new land of belonging and freedom, they had to pass through the wilderness, a dry and thirsty place. Listen again to the first verse of our text. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages, as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. They were moving from one kind of life to another, from a life of slavery in Egypt, where the most important choices in their lives had already been made for them by others, toward the promise of freedom. But the journey towards freedom can be a dry and thirsty business. This episode in Exodus is a picture of the human condition. Sometimes change is thrust upon us. whether we are ready or not. But the promise of something new is not always enough to keep us from looking back longingly at the way things used to be. In verse 3, we are even told that the people looked back wistfully at the life of slavery they had left behind. It says, but the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? It's not hard for us to rewrite our history. The conditions and the experiences of the past can begin to take on a kind of rosy glow that they never had when we were living through them. This dry and thirsty wilderness experience prompted the people to complain to Moses, and then they began to complain about Moses. Listen again to verse 2. The people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? And why do you test the Lord? In those times in life when we move from one way of life towards a way that is new and different, we may even wonder with the people of Israel, is the Lord with us or not? Especially when tragedy strikes, we may well wonder where God is when it hurts. We may question where the Lord is when bad things happen to good people. But in our story this morning, we hear the people asking, where is God when my life changes? And is God among us when our life together as a church moves from the past toward a new way of doing and being the church? Our movement toward the promise can be a dry and thirsty experience. We have talked before about how in the United States the religious scene has changed dramatically over the past few decades. Surveys of religious affiliation reveal the percentage of people who identify with no religious group is somewhere around 30%. We know that throughout the 20th century in our country, the vast majority of people identified with some religious group. But now, those who have no affiliation, the nones as they are called, represent the single largest group. In fact, a few years ago, Rhonda attended a conference for chaplains at which this dramatic change to the religious environment was discussed. And the question was asked, what is the role of pastoral care in this new and strange environment? We seem to be moving through a desert time for the church. Church budgets and attendance have shrunk compared to even 20 years ago, and the pandemic only added to the challenges that we face. Recently, I read about the return in some denominations of circuit-riding pastors in response to these profound changes to religion in American life. And I read about a husband and wife pastoral team in West Virginia serving 5 congregations between the two of them. We are certainly in a time of great transition in the church. Some years ago, author William Bridges identified 3 stages of transition: endings, and then a neutral zone, and then new beginnings. And he tells us transition starts with an ending. This is paradoxical but true, he says. This first phase of transition begins when people identify what they are losing and learn how to manage these losses. And they determine what is over and being left behind and what they will keep. These may include relationships, processes, team members, and locations. And then there is the neutral zone, the desert time. This is the time between the old reality and the old sense of identity and the new one. People are creating new processes and learning what the new roles will be, but it's in flux and it doesn't feel natural or comfortable yet. It is the seedbed of the new beginnings that are sought. This is the neutral zone. It's the time when we often feel that thirst, the time when we are likely to ask, is God among us or not? And finally, there comes the time of new beginnings. Beginnings involve new understandings, new values and attitudes. Beginnings are marked by a release of energy in a new direction. They are an expression of a fresh identity. The people who followed Moses had not yet fully said goodbye to life in Egypt. And now they were moving from one campsite to the next with no reliable supply of food and water. Their journey towards freedom, a freedom that they had never known, was a dry and a thirsty business. And Moses himself had to adjust his leadership to a new situation. Listen again to verse 4. So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are ready to stone me." God's response in verses 5 and 6 to Moses' prayer must have been surprising to him. The Lord said to Moses, "Go ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it so that the people may drink." God instructed Moses to surround himself with the elders of the community. Moses, he was saying, do not try to manage this situation all on your own. You are not alone. Not only was the Lord moving among and with the people, but as the people journeyed toward the promise, God was creating community. Moses was instructed not only to strike a dry rock in order to provide water, but he was also directed to surround himself with other leaders. President Abraham Lincoln faced immense challenges that few leaders have had to face. After he won the Republican nomination and was elected president in November of 1860, he faced the task of leading a deeply divided country. One of the first steps that Lincoln took to address that problem was asking some of his political rivals and competitors to be a part of his cabinet. William Seward, Salmon Chase, and Edward Bates were just a few of the people whom Lincoln included in his initial cabinet. President Lincoln famously surrounded himself with a diverse group of leaders, even his political rivals. He knew that by himself he could not provide every bit of leadership that was required to face those desperate times. In our individual lives, it is important to ask for help, to walk with friends and family and neighbors to get through the transition times in life. It is also what we need to do in our congregations in times of change and transition from the old towards the new. We especially need to surround our pastors with our support. No man or woman is strong in every area that is needed for healthy church life. There in the wilderness, on the way towards freedom, in that dry and thirsty place and time, God said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you." Sometimes we expect, or hope at least, that our leaders will come equipped with a miraculous walking stick like the one that Moses carried. God said to Moses, "Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it so that the people may drink." Wouldn't it be wonderful if our leaders could come equipped with a wonder-working staff like the one that Moses carried? But we know that no staff can turn back the hands of time. We cannot move backwards, only forwards towards the promise. as this congregation seeks new pastoral leadership. Our text this morning challenges us. Who will be among the elders available to support and to surround the new installed pastor as you face the challenges of the next few years together? The people traveling with Moses asked the question, is the Lord among us or not? We may sometimes find ourselves asking that same question. Is the Lord among us or not? Whether we know it or not, God provides God's people with what we need for the journey. Verse 1 of our text tells us, from the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. Did you notice that? They journeyed by stages. They did not complete their journey towards freedom all at once. And that experience in the wilderness together, that Exodus experience, became for them the formative experience that made them who they are as a people. Our text this morning challenges us to move forward through uncertainty about the future. Let us walk together towards the promise. And when we ask, is the Lord among us or not, let us reassure each other that God is walking with us, and God will also meet us when we arrive. Amen.